A very good evening to everyone and a happy new year to you all. Welcome to this Scrutiny Performance and Standards Committee meeting, my first meeting as your new chair. Could I ask everyone to note the fire instruction safety and that on hearing the alarm you should leave the chamber via the double doors at the back, exit the building through the main entrance and congregate in the car park. Also, please switch off your mobile phones and turn any other electronic devices being used to silent. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is subject to an internet webcast recording where the proceedings are capable of repeated viewing. If you are seated in the public area of the council chamber, it is likely that your image will be captured by the recording cameras and result in your image becoming part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should leave the public seating area of the council chamber and move to the upper public gallery. If members are for any reason not present for the whole debate on an item, you should consider and seek advice as necessary on whether or not it will be appropriate for you to vote on that item, and may I remind members to declare any interests when this item is raised on the agenda. Before we start the meeting formally, Councillor Gordon, I believe you would wish to say a few words to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. May I welcome Councillor Mark Haig as the new chair of this committee. As I'm sure you all know, he's been a councillor for several years now and is a former mayor and is a solicitor, so I'm sure he will make an excellent chair. And may I thank the outgoing chair, Councillor Dominic Naylor, for all the work he has done on this committee. He had his own unique style he has chaired this committee for almost 2 years. I found him always a very fair, attentive chair and always managed to see who was wanting to speak more quickly than I did. We also welcome Councillor Alison Fulcher back on the committee, and I say goodbye to Councillor Ben Rigby, but he is here tonight on the, not as a member of this committee. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Gordon, for your kind words, and I would echo the sentiments expressed regarding departing Chair, Councillor Dominic Naylor. We move then to item 1 of the agenda, apologies for absence. Mrs. Folkes, are there any apologies before you?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Sangha, with Councillor Barber substituting this evening.
Welcome, Councillor Barber. Item 2 of the agenda, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations to be made at this juncture? Councillor Aspinall.
Thank you, Chair. One of your items this evening is regarding 106 monies. We have a presentation from the County Council. I just need to declare that I'm a County Councillor and have an interest in that area.
Thank you, Councillor Aspinall. We move then to item 3 on the agenda, minutes of previous Scrutiny Performance and Standards Committee meetings. In fact, there are 2 sets of minutes which I understand require approval. The first being one which I believe was deferred. I should make it clear that I can't express anything with respect to this because I was not present at either meeting. But tabled in front of you is the action tracker, which shows updates from the previous meetings. There are, as I've said, 2 sets of meetings to approve. The first is the meeting on the 26th of September. These are the minutes that were previously deferred. Is it agreed that I sign as a correct record the minutes of the Scrutiny Performance and Standards Committee meeting held on the 26th of September 2025, which begin on page 5 of the agenda? Thank you. Then we move to the second set of minutes. These relate to the meeting held on the 5th of November 2025, which begin on page 11 of the agenda. Is it agreed that I sign as a correct record the minutes of the Scrutiny Performance and Standards Committee held on that date? Councillor Slade.
Sorry, Chair, thank you. I'm just surprised that on the minutes there's no reference to, with the infrastructure, that it was actually noted that there was a figure that was incorrect on the infrastructure funding statement, and there's no reference to this or nor that figure's been corrected. There was three, I'm just looking at the report now, there were three figures of 2.7 million on that report, and in one of the locations the incorrect figure had been put, and we was advised by Mr Dickinson that that would be corrected. So I'm just surprised there's no reference to that in the minutes or nor in notification that that's actually been amended.
Ms Foakes.
Yeah, apologies, this was missed from the minutes, but we can amend them if you all agree before, and then you could agree the new ones. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. That will be noted. Councillor Gordon.
In the minutes, item 228, the member inquiry process delivered through the councillor portal was highlighted as an ongoing issue. As you probably know, there was due to be a meeting yesterday with several of us to go through the what's proposed to replace the online members portal. That's been postponed until either Friday the 16th of January or Tuesday the 20th of January. And members of that working group have had an email as such. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gordon. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, just on page 4, I231 recommendation 2, there's two sentences that have lines through. Can I just ask the obvious question? Are those lines through those sentences because they're not to be included in the minutes?
Ms Foakes, are you able to assist Councillor Slade?
So the lines the wording that's scored 3 was the original wording. This was then changed subject to your amendment. So it's just showing what has been changed.
Thank you, Councillor Slade. We move then to item 4 on the agenda, housing caretaking. The report begins on page 17 of the agenda. Ms Stretch, do you have anything to add to the report?
Nothing to add, but happy to take any questions.
I will therefore move the recommendation contained in the report. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Do you wish to reserve your right to speak should it be necessary?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can now put the matter out to debate. Who wishes to ask? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. It's good that we have this highlighted to us tonight, but I am surprised that it has come prior to being discussed fully at housing. So we would have had recommendations maybe that we would have been able to scrutinise in more detail than the actual report that we have tonight. But reading it, I think it's rather a sad reflection of the times we live in, isn't it? That after 4 times of advertising, unable to get anybody to fulfil that role. And I think, obviously, money is the basis of everything, isn't it? And if we pay the rates that people want to do, you get people to do it. But then that reflects on the charges that go back to the tenants. So it's not a straightforward answer to this, but we totally accept the fact that something needs to be done. It needs to be addressed, as the report says. The residents aren't happy and the tenants aren't happy, and we're not happy that one of our properties are not being maintained to the level. I'm not trying to be clever because I'm sure people will have lots of ideas, particularly as it comes through housing. But I just wondered whether there's possibilities of thinking, perhaps setting up residents' associations or offering it to tenants living within blocks that may then be able to have either reduction in their rent or, sorry, excuse me, or the pay that they get would be reflected that way. So there was a bonus. And also perhaps somebody newly retired that might find that role quite useful if they were actually living there. And also they'd have more pride then because people care about where they live, don't they? So I'm sure there's plenty of ideas that will come forward. But I look forward to when we have it at housing and we'll be able to really discuss it in detail and look at all the options that have come forward after consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. I obviously welcome the opportunity to discuss the contents of this item as the member that referred this to the Scrutiny Committee. Whilst I've only been a councillor for a few years compared to some, the number of times that residents have come to me and my colleagues, Councillor Pound and Councillor Patel, within our ward with dissatisfaction around the caretaking service has been quite large. So I make the following points. There is no mention that this was referred by members. I note that. I also note that the involvement of councillors, detailed on page 19, says where required, councillors will be invited to focus groups to highlight areas of concern. I wonder who decides whether councillors are required or not. I do think this is a councillor-led piece of feedback that we're dissatisfied with the service on behalf of our residents, and I think that that should be a mandatory action that councillors are involved in this process. I also think that, and forgive me because I'm not normally on the Scrutiny Committee as an ordinary member, that the report that should be presented to the Scrutiny Committee should have the conclusions and the recommendations for the analysis that's been performed within the Housing Committee and the course of action to remediate deficiencies in the service. And that isn't manifest in this item tonight. Indeed, we are asked to note the contents of the report and that all future updates will be reported to the Housing, Health and Communities Committee, which is a great committee and works very hard, for sure. But that will not allow this committee to properly scrutinise the service on behalf of our residents. And I would have thought that the work should have been, because it's been well known, and I've been told many times by council officers that the issues with the caretaking service have been well known, we should have had those discussions within Housing Committee by now. We should actually be having some of the recommendations and the analysis of the complaints received from residents and tenants actually discussed in that committee. The working group should be cross-party working group to look at the problems and to give our feedback to officers. And then ultimately the final report should be coming back to here for the Scrutiny Committee to scrutinise and to do their function. Look, I welcome it for what it is, and I make no comments about the housing team. They've had a very challenging task in today's climate of increasing prices and difficulty in resourcing with staff to do certain jobs. But this seems to be the wrong way round. The scrutiny should be getting the final report with the recommendations to improve the service, and the Housing Committee should be tasked with going away and doing that. and with all great respect, I would find it hard to vote for the recommendation in front of us tonight. But I do want the service significantly improved. I just don't think that the committee should be asked to approve the report in its current state. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barber. Councillor Wagland.
Yes, I would endorse a lot of what's been said so far, and certainly the procedure doesn't seem to me to be satisfactory in terms of scrutiny, because we don't seem to have started with a full report. I mean, for example, just above options, there's a reference to undertaking a wider review in line with the housing improvement plan, and a number of other points. And those, it seems to me, ought to come into a final report. We should see that, and it should go to housing. Whether it goes to housing in between is, I'm agnostic about, perfectly happy about. But I do think the most important thing is that it is seen by scrutiny, because that's what this committee is about. And every report that we read, particularly in relation to places like Thurrock, makes very clear the significance of the scrutiny function. And I have batted on this territory, Chair, before your arrival, which is welcomed, but on the footing that these sorts of matters were taken away to a committee without scrutiny of where the document properly has reached, and my point is it hasn't properly reached where it should have done for us to see it, that part of it should not vanish out of the process in order to take it away to housing, because the whole point of scrutiny is to have that independent review, as it were, by another committee, not the housing committee. And just to add one further concern I have, which is that it was very striking to me reading this rather short report, the difference between what is available to private rented tenants when they're paying service charges and what's available to our council tenants in these circumstances. And it struck me with some force that, of course, if it's a private rental matter and service charge, then the law requires that input from the tenants is made to whoever is going to be caretaker, particularly if it's outsourced to a company or the like. But it looks very carefully at those questions with the benefit of residents' communications. So whilst I appreciate these aren't private sector, it simply flagged for me something that I'd seen where I have some estates in Councillor Gorton's and my area where we have some people who are private rented tenants and our council tenants in the same blocks or in the same piece of estate. And it has been quite a matter of concern to me, the difference between what we should be doing for the private ones and what we should be doing for the council tenants. So I would like to see those sort of things replicated as part of how we decide to deal with issues around caretakers, because it's clearly enormously important to have a satisfaction level of 53.5%, dropping it now to 52.8%. We're clearly not making any inroads in that satisfaction level. So those would be my suggestions, Chair, and I think I would very much like to see the question of residents' associations and the like picked up, because I do think that in itself would give a little bit more substance to what seems to me to need to be a good analysis that we can have looked at by us as scrutiny. Thank you.
Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. Reading this report, I'm unsure if I should be reading it with a scrutiny hat on or with a housing hat on. Obviously, we're at scrutiny, so I'll talk at it from a scrutiny point of view. So page 19, regarding the options, one of the first options is reducing existing service or frequency to some well-maintained smaller blocks to ensure a consistent service in a higher density estate. With a scrutiny and performance standard hat on, I look at that and my first questions are, will this be a permanent reduction? If it is a permanent reduction, if any potential charges are going to be introduced, will they be reduced charges to the smaller blocks because they're getting a less frequent service? So I think when reading this report, I think it brings to us a lot of questions that we can't get the answers for, because, as Councillor Wagland said on page 18, it clearly states to fully address all concerns with the caretaking service, the Housing Department will be undertaking a wider review in line with the Housing Improvement Plan. So, given obviously multiple concerns, I would suggest a change to the recommendation so that it would read to note the contents of the report and that the wider review will be reported to Scrutiny Performance and Standards before going to the Housing, Health and Communities Committee. And that would be my suggestion to you, Chair.
Are you actually suggesting an amendment then to the... Is that then... Yeah, I think you have to have that seconded, don't you?
Chair, yes, I think that is. I appreciate this is a to note, but unfortunately it goes further than saying to note, to note, and says that everything after that will be reported to housing. So this would be, if you read that literally, the last point at which this would be seen by scrutiny, and for me it isn't an adequate report for that purpose.
So, Ms. Strange.
Okay, so I think it's a time thing on this report. So the caretaking review has always been in the Housing Improvement Plan. Obviously, originally, the Housing Improvement Plan and Board, there was a proposal that came to scrutiny about that being on the scrutiny work programme rather than going to housing, and a decision was made that the Housing Improvement Plan around the regulatory housing consumer standards was that the work from that would report to Housing Committee. Obviously, Councillor Barber has made he submitted a work programme request to around caretaking on to scrutiny, and we've done this report as kind of an interim measure because this caretaking is on the improvement plan, but it was always scheduled for 26-27 year as an improvement. There have been numerous services in the housing service that have needed improvement, and as a team, we absolutely know that this is one of them, but there are only certain functions that we can look at any one time, given the capacity within the team. So this report was almost that we did not want to ignore the requests that had come through to scrutiny, so we did want to make it very clear that we are doing a review. That review has and was always scheduled to be in the Housing Improvement Plan for 26-27. The report obviously suggests that then the work that is done on the review, that would go, that the work on that and the options paper would go to Housing Committee because it is part of the Housing Improvement Plan. So I'm not changing anything that you've said, but I just wanted to be able to give that context to you around why this report has come here. It's come here in response to obviously a request, and we are looking at the improvements for this service, but it was always scheduled in an agreed improvement plan that was scheduled for 26-27, so it's almost come a bit earlier than our improvement plan had scheduled it in for.
Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. I was a member of your committee, but I gave up my place to Councillor Alison Fulcher. Couple of points. One, I appreciate the contributions from Councillor Barber and Councillor Wagland. They're very detailed, as you would expect from experienced councillors. But the common thread between them is that there is an interplay between this committee and the Housing Committee, which will need to play out in terms of the dynamic of what housing then go on to look at in more detail as part of the more comprehensive plan that the officer mentioned, and that there would also have to be at some point a reference back to this committee so that we can see that the actions undertaken in this paper are concluded. It is disappointing to look at the satisfaction figures. They are barely adequate, in my opinion. That's not a reflection on the hard work of those caretakers who are undertaking the work they're doing, but it's a reflection of the limitations of the service under which they're doing it. And I know that there is common ground between all members of this committee and indeed those who aren't members of it, that there is room for improvement, which can only be a positive because there's a united goal between us to improve that. I agree with Councillor Davies about making sure that job opportunities are available to actual tenants of the blocks. It's not a hard thing to print off a job advert and stick it on a pinboard or a wall and make people aware that that is, a highly local job that's available to them should they wish to do so. And I think perhaps in this modern age we have an over-reliance on digital advertising for things like this, whereas a simple old-fashioned belts and braces approach might do better. I think it's been a very useful debate. There's some good contributions from all members. There is more work to be done, and I think that this committee should certainly come back to look at it in the future, but housing will certainly need to take this forward as an action item.
Councillor Slade.
Chair, sorry, I'm just looking at the work programme from the previous committee, and it clearly says referrals to be considered council caretaking service for residential tenants. But when looking at today's work programme, obviously I know I'm jumped ahead on the agenda, but it's actually not on the work programme. And I understand obviously Ms Stretch's comments, but if this is correct that this is an interim report, then should that not be said on the recommendation, rather where it says report to state the contents of this interim report?
Ms Stretch, are you able to assist Councillor Slade?
That might be my wording. When I meant interim report, I didn't mean to scrutiny. I meant this is, obviously we didn't want to not answer the scrutiny request that came through from Councillor Barber at all, so we obviously wanted to acknowledge that we have picked up that this is an area of interest, and this was a report to answer that, but obviously the recommendation is that the further reports would be going to Housing Committee. That's the recommendation. So there are further reports due on this, but it would go through the Housing Committee.
Councillor Wagner.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate we're trespassing on time. But if I may say so, the short point on this is that I think everyone, but certainly everyone on this side of the chamber, and I think everyone, does not feel this is a satisfactory report in terms of what it tells us about what is happening with the service. Personally, I have no problem with it then going to housing and coming back to us. What I have a problem with is it not coming back to us at all, because I don't understand what I would say to an inspector looking at the scrutiny function in this organisation as to how we closed this issue off, other than by handing it back to the Housing Committee to deal with. Now, I'm not criticising housing in any shape or form, but I've said this before, scrutiny is a different function, and we ought to be making sure that we treat it with the seriousness that it deserves. And that means that when something's been raised, when we are all concerned about it, Councillor Wrigley very fairly put the point about satisfaction, then we should be able to say to our residents, and what scrutiny did was, and it shouldn't be, we sent that to housing without knowing that it was going to come back and tell us what was being done about it, because we don't think it's adequate. If we all thought that this looked great and it was all going in the right direction and the options would be fine, that would be different. So if you'll forgive me, my point remains one that I've made on numerous occasions here, that it is really important that we do not undermine the importance of the scrutiny function within a local authority. Thank you.
Councillor Barber.
Thank you, Chair. If I just come back and I'll be brief. I note the comments that were made, and I'm sure that yes, it was part of the housing improvement programme. But my problem is, looking at this report, it gives me no confidence that the direction of travel of this council in relation to caretaking services acknowledges the conclusions that would have been drawn from the light touch review of the caretaking service that's actually referenced in this report. There is actually no analysis or explanation of where the major failings are. There are no interim, temporary, initial areas of improvement identified in this report to the Scrutiny Committee. Hopefully the Housing Committee will follow up on that. But it's an act of faith and hope. And scrutiny isn't an act of faith or hope. It's to review facts. So I can't vote for the recommendation as it stands. Whether I abstain or vote against, I'm not sure. But I'm not filled with confidence reading this report that we are on top of it at this stage. As a scrutiny committee, I think we should have more assurance.
Councillor Davis.
I think this is where I started, Chair. on the highlighting the fact this hasn't as yet been presented to housing, and this is what must happen for the results of that to then be, I totally agree, come back to be scrutinised as to whether that's satisfactory. But we can't keep on discussing something that hasn't as yet started the process in housing, and it's vital that it starts, it's vital that it's urgent because of obviously what the report is telling us. But please, Chair, can I recommend that we do bring it back to scrutiny, but subject to the housing and the recommendations as they will be found at housing. Thank you.
I don't know if I can be clear from what Councillor Davis was saying, is that is it possible to organise some or to preempt a referral back to housing with then a further referral back to audit and to this committee should the need arise? Or
Procedurally, do we not have a proposal for an amendment from Councillor Slade that we need to, but we've not voted on the amendment?
no, thank you, Councillor Palmer. Yeah. So, do we? If you, we have speaking on the amendment, or Councillor
I
Gerard.
did raise my hand a little while ago, but I personally, I have listened to Ms Stretch and Councillor Davis, and I am satisfied with the existing recommendation. I would be happy to vote on this. I think Housing Department need to do their job. The action plan needs to be executed, and then I understand we voted that way previously. I think I was probably part of that committee. I think we should see it again, but that would be at the conclusion of the Housing Department's review, because I can't see how we can preempt work that hasn't yet been done.
Thank you, Councillor Gerard. Councillor Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. I just have one simple request of Ms Stretch. You mentioned on page 18 the one result of the tenant satisfaction measures survey. Could you supply to members a link to that survey so we can see all the results of that survey? Thank you.
Yes, so the results of the tenant satisfaction measures are always published on our website because we're open and honest about those, but what I can also provide is some benchmarking with other local authorities about their results to sort of, you know, you're looking at it in this context of these results don't look good, and obviously we do want an improvement, but I can also share some benchmarking from the results from other similar local authorities as well.
So, Councillor Slade, if I could ask you to confirm your amendment, we can then proceed to the vote on it.
Thank you, Chair. So to note the contents of the report and that the wider review will be reported to the Scrutiny, Performance and Standards Committee.
Thank you. So we can now progress to vote on Councillor Slade's amendment to the recommendation in the report. All those for?
Point of clarification, that is after it has been through the Housing Committee and process. Yes? No? Yeah?
So all those for? So the amendment is carried. So I think if they're given the amendment, then we abandon the original motion and we move and becomes a substantive. So. Is there anything that anyone else wants to say on the substantive recommendation? So if we can take a vote on the substantive motion, all those for? We now move to item 5 on the agenda, Essex County Council developer contributions. The report begins on page 23 of the agenda. I would like to offer a warm welcome and to thank Councillor Lee Scott, Cabinet Member for Housing, Planning and Regeneration, together with Alethea Evans, who is the Lead Infrastructure Planning and Finance Manager, for attending this meeting this evening. Unfortunately, no planning officers can be here this evening. They are otherwise engaged on another meeting at Rochford regarding their local development plan, but we didn't want to miss this opportunity to afford members an opportunity to ask questions, which I'm sure you will have many of, to Essex County Council's representatives who I've already mentioned. Hopefully all questions can be dealt with by the Essex County Council officers, but if there are questions to members of our planning team, then they're going to have to be taken offline at a subsequently. So I think I can then put it out to the floor. Who wishes to ask some questions regarding
Presentation first.
That's, I do apologise. We're going to go to the presentation first, and then the. Thank you.
That button? Perfect. I'm new at this. We don't have this. Lee, would you like to say a few words before I go through? Absolutely fine.
Yeah, before Alethea does the presentation, I'd just like to say that there's a number of misunderstandings and misconceptions about 106 agreements and where monies are spent and where they're not spent and trigger points, etc. So I think it's important that, if possible, we listen to a presentation and then both Alethea and myself will take any questions that anyone would ask. So after the presentation, if those questions are easy, I'd be delighted to answer them. If they're difficult, Alethea will be absolutely delighted to answer them. But nonetheless, I think it's best if we allow Alethea to do the presentation and then take any questions, as I'm sure they will arise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lee. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Alethea. I work for Essex County Council. I have been asked to speak to you today about Section 106, income, outgoings, expenditure, what we need, how we do it, processes. I'm not familiar with you all. It'd be lovely to be more familiar, because I imagine that would make my job and your job hopefully a little bit easier, and maybe devolution will bring us there one day. I've got about 17 slides. I will probably talk for about 15 minutes. Like Lee says, it would be useful if questions could be held till the end, if that's all right. That would be amazing. I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction about the team and what my team does generally to set a bit of context, and then go into some elements of Section 106. My final slide will set out some details of what we hold for Brentwood. I said Brentford then. That's not going to work today, is it? It's a football team. Clearly, my mind is on tomorrow's Arsenal game. Let's not talk football. Okay, so I will start. My presentation is here, and of course, if anyone's got any detailed questions, I'm probably going to find it a little bit difficult to answer detailed Section 106 questions about ones that we've signed, where we're up to in terms of anticipated. More than happy to answer questions afterwards. My email address can be shared, phone numbers, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is the planning service at Essex, headed up by Graham Thomas. There are 4 smaller teams within the overall planning service. I manage one of the teams where we oversee infrastructure planning and strategic development. We also have a service who look at county planning elements, so that's minerals and waste, determining Reg 3 applications, so that's schools and some roads, applications on land that we own, flood initiatives, that kind of thing. We also have a growth and development team. The growth and development team, led by Matthew Thomas, tends to look at larger scale development, anything over about 750 homes. They will provide a consultation response to your officers on the opinions of the county council, what we need infrastructure wise. That team also looks at NSIP, so National Infrastructure Schemes, so Bradwell Power Station when that was a thing, and now we've got Norwich to Tilbury, and there's a whole range and raft of those under that heading. You might be more familiar with the spatial planning team. That team interacts directly with your local plans team, supporting them on the types of infrastructure that will be needed by the types of homes or developments that are coming forward in the district. So my team in detail, we are infrastructure planners. We merge neatly, or we try to, the specialisms of finance with the specialism of the legal profession, with the specialism of planning. We are trying to secure the right infrastructure in the right place to support our communities. And they are our communities. It's not mine, it's not yours, it's ours. We are trying to make sure that there are schools and roads and flood schemes in the right place in Brentwood and the rest of the county. I've also had a bit of a hand, I can't claim any real responsibility than that I made Money Move, but that's a key skill of mine. Money Move to support the SIL that you have now adopted in Brentwood. Graham and I, my boss, we came up with the plan of could we fund a project that would bring SIL to more districts and boroughs in Essex, because it's yet another way of getting a slice of the pie out of developers. They can afford it. We need things like SIL alongside Section 106. So we offered money to Brentwood, and you have now implemented a SIL that's adopted. I don't think you've actually secured any money through the SIL yet, but it's fresh, isn't it? It's literally last year. So that was another project that I've worked on. Did the same in Castle Point, and we're working on 2 others in Essex as well. So a really busy team. There are about 45 members of staff in that team. My team is a team of me, a principal officer, and 4 other officers. I'm going to start talking about local plans right at the top of this presentation, because I think they are the most important key to unlocking infrastructure. If you don't have a local plan, you're going to find it very, very difficult to get money for infrastructure out of developers. You're in an incredibly fortunate position here. I did a small amount of support, and a lot of people at Essex did to help with the Brentwood local plan. I know that's in place. And that's brilliant. And I think that really is testament to where you're going to end up versus other districts and boroughs in Essex. I know that you've prepared infrastructure delivery plans to go alongside, and that was sort of an element of work that I supported on, making sure that the exact cost of infrastructure was included in the delivery plan, and any gaps that we needed in funding were identified, because that will be where we'll be hopefully bidding for SIL money in the future from, or government bidding for funding for that infrastructure, because those gaps need to be closed so that we can build that infrastructure. It is really key that developers know exactly what they're going to be asked for when they are building new homes, building new businesses in Essex and places like Brentwood. We have a developer guide, and that guide is published online, and it links in with all the local plans, and it makes it very clear what we are going to ask for as a county council and infrastructure provider, and it sits alongside a partner document to local plans and planning application processes. One of the challenges that we have in Essex is that infrastructure and mitigation measures are not always priced into the cost of land. Developers are bidding very, very early, years, decades in advance of bringing forward planning applications, and they are offering landowners prices for land that then makes it very difficult to deliver infrastructure later on down the line, because they don't know how much infrastructure is going to be required. They can't possibly know what is going to be on the ground and what might be required. So having a local plan is yet another way of ensuring that that is literally a timeline of this is what's coming on and forward planning all the development that's going to come forward in Brentwood. Yes. Okay, so into a little bit of nitty-gritty about Section 106 agreements. Like so much of the planning system, Section 106 arrangements are very much grounded in the legal system. The Act, which governs the form and the content of agreement, requires that agreements make development acceptable in planning terms, delivering a school to accommodate additional pupils as a result of new households, for example. And the clauses that have to be included within agreements must pass 3 tests known as the Reg 122 tests. They're up on screen. Hopefully everyone can see them. These really do control the parameters of and the contents of legal agreements, and then also the spending of that funding once it's agreed. I am asked to justify almost on a daily basis, directly in line with these regulations, what we are asking for, what we are securing, and what we have then spent that money on. I will show figures at the end. I'm jumping ahead, but I'm thinking of questions. I will show figures at the end that I've added up, I've totted up all the money that Brentwood have, or Essex has, in terms of delivering education, infrastructure, for example. And I think it's worth remembering that those tests will govern how we spend that money, because it isn't the case that we have a single pot of education money that we can spend on education anywhere in Brentwood. They are linked to specific developments. The impact of those developments is what's given rise to the need for the money in the first place, and we must spend it to resolve that mitigation need. So how does the system work in Essex? This is a crazy slide with tiny writing, but it's all relevant, and I think it would be worth a little walkthrough, so I will do that. So the spatial planning team starts with engagement on local plans and the infrastructure delivery plan, and then hopefully, it takes a long time, that the plan is adopted by district, borough, city councils in Essex. The next stage in the planning process is a pre-application, normally pre-application engagement. My team, the wider planning service at Essex, are brought into that discussion. We do charge for our time because it takes a lot of time to work out exactly how much we're going to need and work out the infrastructure impact of a development. We bring services on board from the education team, highways do this themselves, education team, waste team, all come together to put together an ask when we understand what an application will entail. And we come up with some ballpark figures for a developer to consider in terms of what the ask is going to be from an education perspective. The developer will obviously then move that development forward if they think it's viable and feasible, and submit a planning application to the district borough council. We are then formally consulted, and we will pair what we've said at the pre-app stage with the type of development, of exact details at that point, and we will respond to that application. If nothing has changed, it will probably fit exactly with what advice we've given in the first place. My team then consults internally to make sure everything is the same, nothing has moved on, and we get a response out to the planners here at Brentwood. It is in your control to negotiate directly with the developer, regardless of what my team ask for. We can make an ask, we supply a lot of evidence, and I think we're in a really fortunate position that relationships between Essex and Brentwood are excellent. It is incredibly rare that we don't get what we ask for in terms of infrastructure contributions, which is brilliant because it's all based on evidence. We're not asking for something we can't have and shouldn't have, and we are backed up by officers of this council, which is excellent. Determining that planning application is down to the district or borough, and then Section 106 will be drawn up if that's required between the 3 legal teams, so the developer, Brentwood Council, and we are a signatory at Essex. Highways teams and my team instruct our legal teams separately. That's fun, maybe one day that'll be a bit more joined up. And the Section 106 is then signed. My team then manages, monitors that development, checks is the development coming forward as planned, understands when the trigger points are because we've asked for those trigger points to trigger payments of contributions. And we support the delivery of the infrastructure by invoicing for that money, moving it across to allocations, particular mitigating infrastructure, a school perhaps that's going to be expanded. We either hand that money to the school directly, more rare, more likely that our infrastructure delivery team will actually go and build whatever the project is that we've agreed to do. So my takeaway from that, and I hope yours, is good working relationships are key, and how very important it is to be collaborative, and we are collaborative. So what do we ask for as Essex County Council? I'm just going to have a drink. So as I've said, in relation to those 3 tests, early doors, developer contributions can only be requested to mitigate the impact of development. And that's as a result of that legal framework that I described previously. We make requests only for contributions which mitigate the impact of that specific proposed development. And although we request contributions for a range of infrastructure, I'll show you what we ask for in a moment, the biggest impact of new housing proposals is on education capacity and also the highway network. We have published a developer guide that sets out the scope and scale of operation of developer contributions. It's available online, and it underpins all our requests. So the evidence of what we need, why we need it, and how much it's going to cost is published, and developers and district councils alike are well aware of what things will cost. One key element that shouldn't be overlooked is probably the preparedness of our departments. I don't know that this is particularly perfectly done. Everybody is very busy. I'm sure it's the same everywhere in local government. There isn't enough staff. Everyone is very busy trying to do their best. But in order to make good requests, it relies upon education colleagues not being off sick or being available to respond quickly. Planning application turnaround time is, 21 days? So I need to make sure, and others at the County Council need to make sure that officers are in a good place, able to respond accurately. Evidence of the need for contributions is also really important, and a good example of that on the education side is the 10-year plan. Education published that. It is a forward plan of what they think will be needed based on population changes, development that's coming forward, and population movement over a forward-looking period of 10 years. And they published that online, so that is another pillar of the evidence that supports the need for contributions. We are able to hold on to, well, it's a pillar of Section 106 agreements, we are able to hold on to Section 106 funds for a period of around 10 years. It's sort of a standard clause in most Section 106 agreements, and that enables us, that 10-year period kicks off when we've received all of the money from a particular development, and it enables us to forward plan very effectively what we're going to spend. It does, however, leave us holding quite a lot of money because education and highway projects are very expensive. It does mean that we're holding a lot of money for a long period of time, and I think that might be part of the myth or frustration that developers and possibly even councillors and communities have. It's justified, it's within the legal tests, and we are spending and delivering as best we can. Okay. I've touched on the guide briefly. This is a picture hot off the press. Lee signed the Cabinet Member Action just before Christmas. It wasn't called in as a decision, so it is now online. We have a brand new developer guide, and the purpose of the guide that we've just published is to update the highlighted areas. So you'll be aware that the government changed the access to early years and childcare education. So there are more free fee places, should I say, down to, I think it starts at 0 now, age 0, kids can have free places. We need to make sure that those places are available, and therefore we've had to expand what we ask for so that we can cater for the statutory age range. Special education needs is another new chapter in the guide this time, where previously we weren't capturing enough, and it has really left that particular specialist education area short for a number of years. Now we have moved to a system of capturing exactly a more accurate special education incidents in the community such that we are getting the right amount of money to support those specialist needs. It's a very expensive area, and that's reflected in the cost per place for that type of education infrastructure. So that's a very significant change in the guide this time. And the latter is waste management, where we are now seeking to request contributions towards waste management activities and infrastructure, not activities, from almost all development, so down to the majors level, so 10 dwellings or above. Previously, we were only asking for infrastructure contributions towards waste from huge developments of over 1,000. And actually what we've seen is that we haven't kept pace with, and the pressure on the infrastructure of waste management has been very difficult, and they need an injection of cash. What follows here are some lovely slides that I will not walk through, but I would urge anyone to look through if they wish to. They are flow diagrams of what we get up to, who interacts with who. You may find this useful. I've kept it in because I know that these might be shared afterwards. And I wanted to give you that opportunity to look at who does what and what links with what at the County Council. So, you know, when we interact with local authority, how we interact with Essex Legal Services, who is recording the legal agreements, who is passing instructions, who does what at planning application and pre-app stages. And then perhaps of more interest to this committee is perhaps the latter stage of what we do around monitoring the development itself, how we collect funds, and then how we spend that money and who makes those decisions is contained within these slides in a bit more detail. So to reiterate, local plans, key to securing contributions to infrastructure. We need site-specific policies, and we need generic infrastructure policies. You have those in Brentwood. I think that's why it's working. It's also very key that we have at Essex County Council a robust database or system of managing the money, the legal side, the planning applications. We had an in-house built system. It's an Access database. Microsoft is no longer really supporting Access. We have just agreed, another thanks to Lee, signing off a bit of investment in a brand new system. It's cloud-based. It should help us integrate through devolution, LGR, when that happens to us, a lot better because it's a lot more modern, and it should prevent downtime of the system because Access is notoriously creaky, and the more data you add to it, the worse it gets. It's been a fear of mine for the past 5 years, but we've moved past it and we've modernised that system. So that will really help us get on top of our spending and enable greater scrutiny. One of the key things that might be of interest to this committee is we plan to publish live information using our new system. So probably 12 or 18 months from now, once we've fully integrated and we're all au fait with how it works, we intend to be able to give a snapshot view, a data dump almost, that you can interrogate, that you can run off via a data portal on the Essex website. That way you can go and find out information about what money is where, how much money has arrived, what's still anticipated from particular developments. Another key to obviously securing contributions is having a full staff resource. I'm really lucky, I have a full staff resource at the moment. Some of the team are getting on a little bit and have threatened retirement in the next few years, and I'm terrified because they'll run away with all their beautiful experience. So we're in the process of getting younger blood in and training people up from the bottom, because it's a really important bit of the planning system. It's the bit that people are incensed by. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and rightly so, that it needs to be resourced. And yes, ECC Services investing in their evidence. So I talked a little bit about the education team having that 10-year plan. The waste team, now that they're new to the races, they have evidence of the need for contributions, what they intend to spend on that money on. Drink. So, talking Turkey. It is now a national requirement for councils to publish the details of sums secured through Section 106 agreements. That's the infrastructure funding statement. Brentwood, I think you agreed yours back in November. We were a little bit later and we did ours on Christmas Eve, nothing like the last minute at Essex sometimes. It's out there, she's online now. These figures are taken from, the ones on the right are taken from this year's infrastructure funding statement. You can see that, actually I was a bit surprised when I did this comparison about how similar the amounts were. So that top number there is the amount agreed, not through Section 160s that we've signed in that financial year, and looking at the similarities between 1920 and 24-25, surprised that they were quite similar really. There are fluctuations. I looked at the years between. I might put a graph in next year's IFS. Getting a bit data geeky, but it's good to know what's changing. I think perhaps less impressive is the amount that we're currently sitting on. I haven't put that on the slide, but we haven't been particularly effective at spending that. So you'll see that we've spent 17.3 million in that financial year. Do we need to do a little bit better? I think there's a very detailed story behind the amount that we hold, and I alluded to it before. Infrastructure that we provide is really, really expensive. We have legal permission to hold it for a long time so that we can make the right decisions for the community. So there's different schools of thought on how concerned we should be about that figure. We are delivering schools and roads and infrastructure where they are needed, and I would temper some of that fear about how much we hold. What else was I going to say? Yes, I'm going to move on from that slide. Okay, this is a slide where I was going to talk about so the innovation that we've had around the levy, but I covered that right at the start. We also have a development viability service. So James, who is one of my team members, he will offer support to district and borough councils in terms of, we've got a developer who's claiming that there are viability problems on this site, they don't want to pay infrastructure contributions, or they're contesting being able to deliver affordable housing. Can you comment on that? And James will charge, and it's just his staff time. We're not money making on that. We just want to make sure his staff time is covered. He will review that viability assessment and provide a response. Not hugely well taken up. Some districts use him, some don't. Just wanted to remind members that that is available and it's not particularly expensive. These are some of the viewpoints I like to share with my elected members at the County Council. So I have fears that, you know, cost cutting is always coming, and I fear that lack of investment in my team might result in poorer outcomes for communities. We need investment in those systems and processes, and we have done that in the last couple of months in getting that new database procured. We need to make sure that we have enough staff in the education and highway teams. If you speak to any managers over on the highways team, and if you ever engage with them, they're over busy? Yes. They're understaffed, under-resourced, and yeah, they're incredibly busy dealing with a lot. So yeah, I guess investment is always a key to making sure that infrastructure funding can be managed very well. I am always an advocate for services at ECC who would like to secure Section 106 come to the table with their ask. It's all very well and good libraries asking, oh, we're desperate for a bit of money, but they don't have a strategy that's published that says this is our investment plan for libraries, or they didn't have. They've come a long way in the last 12 months, which is why the guide has been improved to reflect that. I also think ECC services, before they ask, need to be prepared to spend, because if I go and ask and I bring them a cheque for 100,000, £1 million, they need to be prepared to take that through a governance process and actually start a build of a new library and expansion of a school. Education have got that nailed. Other services, they're coming to the races and getting better all the time. That latter point about the National Infrastructure Levy, well, that didn't get off the ground, did it? This is clearly an old slide I've recycled. But here in Brentwood, you have chosen to push ahead with a community infrastructure levy, and I think that's the right thing to do for my money. I wish every district had it. I think if you spoke to colleagues in Surrey who do my job, they would not advocate for a SIL. Many districts in Surrey implemented SIL and then refused to sign Section 106s. They said, we've got a SIL, if you need money, you can come and ask for it. And the County Council doesn't get any money for education or highways or waste or libraries. And I think that's really dangerous. We're undercutting our communities if we're not using Section 106 and SIL both together to get the best for our communities. And then this is the juicy slide. So this is sums available to spend. It is a very simplistic summing up of the funds being held by ECC across each of these areas. This was accurate to the start of December last year, and these sums are subject to the same rules that I spoke about earlier for spending all Section 106 money. So they must be spent in accordance with the legal agreement that they are linked to. So these sums are totalled across a number of different developments, but they are a spend category. They are all for early years, primary, secondary or highways. They are not representative of a total pot that you could spend. You don't have 1.3 million for anywhere in Brentwood. It's a particular development or number of developments that's given rise to that funding that then we can spend. Just for a bit of context, I would say a typical primary school, 2 forms of entry, it's probably costing somewhere between 10, 13 million to deliver. So that isn't a huge amount of money. But it may not be that you need a brand new school. It could be expansions just to increase capacity of a number of schools, and that can be done a lot cheaper. That's my final slide. More than happy to take questions. Should I come back?
Well,
Through the chair, can I just thank Alethea
Well,
for the presentation?
Can I also thank you for an illuminating, comprehensive, thorough and very informative presentation. I would imagine that members here have a few questions for you and Lee, so perhaps I could now put it out to the floor. Councillor Gerard.
Thank you very much. It was really helpful. But I have a question about how do you categorise the difference between Section 106 and SIL? I mean, is it one pot of money that gets divided, or it is two distinct?
Am I on?
You are.
It's 2 distinct pots, but you could use both to deliver. What if you had a primary school, for example, that was very expensive, and you had a small amount of SIL money and a small amount of Section 106, you could pool that and spend it to deliver that, no problem. SIL is effectively a roof tax. Every development, apart from exceptions, will pay that in Brentwood, and it will be rated. I'm not super close to it, actually. I don't know what the rate is, but yes, almost every development in Brentwood housing will pay that tax. You collect that. I assume that there is an implementation process whereby the county council could bid for some of that SIL money for a particular underfunded piece of infrastructure. Primarily, my team, my service is relying on Section 106 contributions. So we're looking at specific developments and saying that is causing an impact on a local school. We would like contributions to expand that, to make allowances for those new pupils, and that's how much this will cost, and we'll secure that through the legal agreement. So rarely would I anticipate needing SIL money. It could happen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a member of your committee, but I once was. Question to our Essex County Council colleagues. Firstly, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. Would it be possible for a copy of those slides to be sent to our members of our planning committee, if Ms. Folks would be able to send them through to all members of that committee, because I think they would find them very instructive and useful. And secondly, in doing so, perhaps if she might communicate those to Emma Goodings and Caroline Corrigan, who are the 2 senior planning officials in Brentwood, who I think might also find them instructive. So that's the first question. The second is there's a common misapprehension that Essex is in some way always sitting on this pile of money and nothing ever seems to get done with it. And that is certainly something that's obvious from some sections of Facebook that I have come across. which aren't always as wholly as informed as this presentation has been. Could you just reassure councillors and indeed the thousands watching that the process by which you distribute it, as you've already outlined in your slides, in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I think the second point I'll take, and I think there's no problem in the slides being shared. I think you have them, don't you? Yeah. So that will be done. There are misconceptions about what Essex holds and it doesn't hold. There are trigger points. As Alethea said earlier, that if a project has been allocated money, but the trigger points haven't been reached yet, that money would not have been transferred. It's not being sat on, it's there and will be used for what it was meant to be used for. But the trigger points could be, and I'll just give you an example from elsewhere, if I may. If 100 houses are being built, and the trigger point is 50 houses, and they've built 37 houses, then the money doesn't come until the 50 houses are built. It's in a legal agreement, is it not? There's nothing we could change about that. So there are a lot of myths there, and I am perfectly certain that through Alethea, and I'm sorry if I'm offering something without even telling you first, but if there was a particular project that applied to, we'd be able to give you the details of it.
Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. And just to echo others' comments, it was an excellent presentation. Thank you for your time tonight. On page 24 of our report, you reference the developer contributions that Essex County Council asked for are based on their published evidence base, which can be found on the attached link. So I've just clicked on that link and I've found pages 86 and 87 of great interest regarding NHS healthcare. Those two pages are, yeah, of course, sorry. So, yeah, right. So those two pages are exceptionally detailed and have given me greater understanding as regards to when a new development is built, and they say that a doctor's surgery will be provided. And then, like in the case of in Rochford, the Bloor development there, it was in November last year, it was then announced that plans for a desperate needed medical centre at a 660 home development had been scrapped, despite the developer paying a substantial amount of money towards a new doctor's surgery or a new health centre. How can yourselves and the developers actually improve the communication? Because when I read what's on page 86, which states, in order to meet the needs of our future populations while making best use of existing assets, one of the priorities of the NHS is to increase utilisation of existing infrastructure, which in some instances will see extension of operating hours and greater collaboration between providers. So that information I feel is quite key and needs to be communicated more. So, because obviously you've had people move into that development expecting the surgery to be built and it hasn't, the developers paid the funds. So yes, my question is, how do you best manage now people's expectations but also improve their communication?
A really good question. I don't control that. Essex County Council have no control over NHS spending. The ICSs, they secure their own funding through the developer agreement. Occasionally they will sign Section 106 agreements or have agreements with developers separately. Essex County Council's role, I believe, is to influence the NHS and support them where we can. They have to come to the party and secure their own funding through developers, but through the agreements. Our hands are tied at that latter stage, but we have good communication with NHS colleagues. Many of them are planning professionals or who've worked in local authorities in Essex. I think it's just a really difficult part of the planning structure, development industry. I don't know why doctor surgeries aren't coming forward. I can't control that, but I'm more than willing to do some of the legwork, and I am doing some of that, but I can't do enough. I don't have that responsibility.
Perhaps if I could come in on that as well. I now serve on the Health and Wellbeing Board, and one of the issues we're raising with the NHS is that very issue, that it is vitally important for any new development, wherever it be in Essex or indeed anywhere else in the country, that the right infrastructure is in place to meet the health and welfare needs of the community that will be living there, whether that be doctor surgeries, dental surgeries or whatever, and trying to improve, if you like, that relationship so that the questions are put, the ask is there, so that the money can be put forward. But it is something that's acknowledged and being worked on.
I'm glad that that chapter is helpful in shedding a bit of light, because I found that helpful when we included it. I didn't necessarily know the linkages, I just knew it wasn't Essex's responsibility, but that signposting is a tiny step along what needs to happen to get this infrastructure delivered.
And that's, I just think if there's one thing that you maybe be beneficial is that to communicate that to either to the local authorities or to the development, because that explains an awful lot on there as to why when a developer makes a contribution to a doctor's surgery, that then that doctor's surgery is then not built, but the NHS use that money in another way to provide the services. So I just think if that piece could be communicated better, I think that'd be very helpful.
Someone once suggested to me that we should put all our Section 106 spending on billboards outside of this is bringing in this many school places, but you could include the NHS on that and information.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm being a bit naive, really, because I'm coming from the point of view of the councillor who sees an application, and the main concern is, is the infrastructure going to be met for this quite large areas of development which we're getting in Brentwood at the present time? I know of a school in Brentwood that's currently panicking, a junior school, because it feels it's totally going to be unable to meet the needs as the housing is coming through. What is your feeling? You know, am I wrong to have all the concerns? Or do you think that the finance is available and you will be able to meet those needs? Because from sitting on the sidelines, sort of representing the residents and loving the town, really starting to feel like we're drowning. We know the health service we can't influence, know that. But, you know, when it comes to education, and I think that's a big issue that is causing major concern. I just wondered how you felt about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take that one. We all have housing requirements being put on us across the whole of Essex, which those numbers are outside our control. They are the requirements that the current government is putting on us. Therefore, on the education side, I do have confidence that we're asking for the monies to put the places that are going to be needed. You're quite right in having concerns because of the sheer volume and numbers that we're all facing. But they are what they are. And certainly I know that the team and the education department in Essex are putting forward those requests to make sure that those places and facilities are available.
I think there's an element of parental preference. It's a complicated area, isn't it? Making sure kids go to the schools that they want to go to, that are where parents find that convenient. And I think if education colleagues were here today, they would have some nuance to the response. I'm not an education professional, unfortunately, but as Lee said, we are making requests. We do secure a good amount of money. I'm not as concerned, but I'm not so close to it as you are, so I think you've got a valid perspective as well.
I think one of the things that cropped up in your presentation, I fear, is the extra need that is coming from SEND. You know, there is a tremendous need now. Now, there may be a variety of reasons for that, and I'm not going to pretend I'm a professional who could say what those reasons might be, but there is added extra requirement from SEND coming the whole time, and that is being accounted for as well, because we have to recognise that. I won't say which area it was because I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone, but I was in an area, nowhere near here, where they said they didn't have an extra SEND requirement. And I actually questioned it and said, I think that's very difficult. I think you need to look further into that because I think you will do. I think everywhere will do.
Thank you. Councillor Wagland.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation, and in particular for some of the myth-busting, I think. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts about the question of the problem, which seems to me to be increasingly one of developers being willing to say, look, we'll throw pounds X at this, and we'll throw pounds X at a play area, let's say, to take us out of education and the like. And that goes into the documents. And then, at the end of the day, you find that that specific use is either not one that will work for whatever reason, or that it's very difficult to make sure that everybody knows where it's going to go. So I have one in my division at the moment where there's been difficulties because the developer in fact volunteered the contribution, so it was a unilateral undertaking, and of course the consequence then became that nobody knew what to do with it. And that seems to me to be part of where we end up with delays, both as district councillors and as county councillors. And I just wondered if you've got any thoughts about that, because the lawyer in me keeps thinking that if we were more precise with the documents, I appreciate a unilateral undertaking didn't give us that opportunity, but if we were, then that would reduce some of the delays, and that it would be good for councillors to understand that that was part of it. So that was my first point. My second point was just on the question of schools, because I know, because wearing my other hat as a lawyer, I'm constantly in places where people come up to me and say, you're also a councillor, and how is it that Essex does better than most on its school modelling in terms of when schools are going to be needed and not? Because one of the things that isn't always realised is that school, if you get your school in too early, then people will come from elsewhere, or they won't come at all, and the buildings will deteriorate and whatever. So the timing of it is, that's just one example. So the time is very, and I just wonder, because I've met with the team, talked to them, and they are fantastically good at explaining this. And I know you can explain it as well, but I just wonder whether we mightn't get them to come down, because education is such a big thing. We've got a lot of development in this area, and whether it would be helpful. It'll be particularly helpful in relation to garden communities where that point arises. And then my third and last point was just about developers challenging viability, because you very helpfully referenced the thing that you and I and Lee and others have fought tooth and nail to get, which is an Essex capacity for this, which will translate into local government reform in due course, because otherwise the developers turn up with the experts and there is no way we can deal with it. I remember Nigel Robinson at Epping Forest once turning up and saying in a meeting with the developers, I'm sorry, but I can't answer any of their points about their challenges to viability because we don't have that expertise. Well, now we do have that expertise, but I think it's important to understand that some of these things are challengeable, not only at the planning stage, but afterwards, because Section 106 can be unravelled. And I thought it was worthwhile having your views about that, because I think we have yet to see that really playing out. So that was three things, as it were. It was about specificity. It was about schools. Can we have that more deep dive from Essex? And what are your thoughts about developers challenging viability and trying to get less that they have to pay from even the figures that we thought we ought to get? Thank you.
I agree with you around unilateral undertakings. We very rarely see them in my team. They tend to be the legal agreement that happens through a hard-fought appeal, where a developer really wants that planning permission, is struggling perhaps with viability or getting things over the line, struggling with capacity of officers, because engaging in an appeal is incredibly time consuming for officers at ECC and the districts. I would always prefer a Section 106. I would always prefer very, very clear lines between ECC signing those Section 106 agreements, them being supported by districts and boroughs. It just clears everything up. We know how much we're going to get, when it will be delivered, what it will be spent on, and that is all captured in a really clear legal agreement. And we've done a lot of work on template Section 106 agreements, and I think that's why we have so much funding and we have so much success in securing school places or infrastructure generally in Essex, because we do very well. There are fewer unilateral undertakings, and that's good, in my opinion. The second point?
That's about schools.
I couldn't speak for Joe and Blaise, but I agree with you. They are excellent. And that 10-year plan for schools, Blaise used to do my job. He's a manager over in the education service now. He understands how Section 106 works, and therefore he's put all of those skills and talents into his current role, where he does those forecasts. And you could certainly ask him, as members of this committee, with the chair's permission, to invite him here to explain how that forecasting works, because it is very impressive, and I think it's another facet to this, because it underpins what we are then able to secure through legal agreements.
And then the third one is just about the challenge liability.
I worry about it. I tend to see more of a challenge in places that don't have local plans, because that local plan and that infrastructure delivery plan is crystal clear. They've signed up to providing that infrastructure through that local plan in order to get an allocation in a local plan. Developers are happy to agree things, and it all starts at that early stage, and they want that development to go ahead. And once you've bedded that in, it will follow all the way through to the planning application in Section 106 stage. The challenges on viability are tending to be more significant in places where there isn't a local plan. I won't name names, but I imagine you could cast about Essex and you could probably pick who you know is going to struggle with viability challenges. It's time consuming, it isn't a good outcome for communities, and that's a shame.
Thank you very much. Councillor Aspinall.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, and thank you for that presentation. I am a county councillor, and I do sit on the county's planning committee. Vast difference between the county's planning and here locally. Massive difference. One of the major things is that we are very local focused and trying to do the best we can for our residents. My biggest frustration over this last 2 years is the 106 contributions that have been made to highways, which seem, rightly or wrongly, to make highway objections disappear. In my own ward in Pilgrim's Hatch, we reluctantly agreed a housing development last year, of which a massive amount was given to highways. £1 million for the improvements of Brentwood High Street. That's a county council function, and their responsibility, as you know, Councillor Scott, as you was Highways cabinet member, to do that. Right, now, so I'm not moaning that the county council can get that money from that way to improve our high street, but that improvement has already been done. So there's now going to be a contribution from that developer of £1 million to the county council for the improvement of something that's already been done. That trigger point, as you're saying, we haven't got that money yet, but also on that development was £860,000 for public realm improvements at Shenfield Station. Now, as a county councillor, and Shenfield Station is in my division, I know that there is no plans that the county has at this moment to improve the public realm. So, my point there is we've accepted these 106 arrangements that have been made without any member involvement for the improvement and so that the developer can go forward with this scheme. Not one single part of that money is improving my local residents whatsoever. Now, that's not your issue, that's a process issue that we and county and highways planners need to sort out because that's unacceptable at this moment. My question to you is, you will get, following the trigger point, Lee, that money coming in to improve the public realm at Shenfield Station. How can I or my residents access that data and find out when this is going to happen? What scheme is that money going to be spent on? And is there a time limit on that monies? Because it used to be after 6 years, if it hadn't been done, the developer could have asked for it back. I don't know whether that's changed now or not, but that is how it used to be. If you could answer that, I'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take that one because what I will do is take it away and actually come back to you with the answers you're requesting on that, because neither Alafia or myself know what the time limit would have been on that money going in, but we can look into that. And also take away the point you've raised about your concerns around it. With regard to being able to access it, the new system, which the budget has been approved for and is now going ahead, will mean that you will be able to access that easily and look at exactly the dates, exactly the money, what it's being used for. We recognise that the old system wasn't capable of doing that, which is why I put the investment in, or signed the money off to put the investment in to make sure it will be able to do that. So that will be able to be done, but I will come back to you for Alafia on the individual point.
There is an awful lot to talk about on 106 agreements, especially in Brentwood at the moment. Sorry, there's an awful lot to discuss about 106 agreements in Brentwood as we've got developments coming out of our ears. We have a local plan. It's not a good one. It's a very bare minimum one and only scraped through the government inspector as long as we reviewed it immediately, because it was devoid of a lot of things that should have been in there. So we have got a local plan, and that local plan has resulted in at least 7 major developments, or major to us, which results in over 1,200 homes being developed in the next few years, or permission has been given. So there's an awful lot of 106 monies floating around from those developments that we need to be able to access, as you say, quite rightly, and understand where they are.
Yeah, thank you for your input. I think if we can, as best we can, we should focus on questions for both Lee and Alethea, who've been kind enough to come along this evening. But thank you for that, Councillor Aspinall. Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Chair. It follows on a bit from Councillor Aspinall's question. But, you mentioned you can hold on to contributions for 10 years after the money has been fully paid. There seems to be a lot of myth and misunderstanding about this. I understand that developers can apply for the money to be refunded if it's not been spent within 6 years, is that right?
So it comes down to the detail of the specific legal agreement. Our standard at Essex is 10 years, and in that 11th year, if it isn't spent, then developers can ask for return of partial or full money. it is a bespoke timeline. There is no standard in law. So if Brentwood have chosen a slightly different time period for the return of funds, that may be so. There are legal agreements that Essex have signed in the past with shorter periods return. Highways money has occasionally been associated with a 5-year return period, and that is justifiable on occasion. But the standard that we include is 10.
Councillor Barber.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very helpful. Thank you for both of you being here tonight. A couple of questions, if I may. How do you handle the, obviously some of the infrastructure stuff that needs to be built is extremely long in delivery. Therefore, you really are at risk in terms of increasing costs. First question is, how do you, when a planning application is going through and you're setting out the Section 106 terms, how do you actually come up with a number and actually make sure that by the time the project is due for delivery and it's maybe got legal agreement, planning permission and everything else, that you actually have the right sum of money to fund that project? That's my first question.
I'd say that there's a contingency built in. Obviously, one can never be totally accurate on what inflation might be over a period of time, but I can think of one that's happening at the moment where a contingency fund which would cover inflation but would occur almost certainly over the period of time before the infrastructure could be put in place. So there are contingency funds built in, and I'm going to praise, if I may, the officers. I don't want to make you blush, but for the amount of work they put in on this to make sure that the funds will cover what we're asking to be put in.
To supplement that slightly, we include an indexation on the cost per place. Let's use education as an example. So they are index linked to the planning permission date normally. And then over time, as that money rolls in, it is uplifted to link to the cost of delivering that infrastructure at the point that the invoice is issued. It is a tricky system, I think, as Leslie started to allude to, around the timing of when you choose to spend that money, because the longer you go on having secured that money, and it is held in an interest-bearing account, that's a legal requirement, should we have to return it, it's also an important point, I guess. Developers want their money back on occasion. So it is a tricky situation if you hold on for that too long and don't spend and deliver, because you potentially could price yourself out. There is an element of that contingency. It isn't the only money that can be drawn into delivering a project. If it is needed enough and justified, it is a facet of funding of infrastructure, Section 106, but there are a few tools there in answer to your question.
My second question is, does Section 106 ever, with mutual agreement, get repurposed? Because circumstances mean that the original purpose wasn't fully deliverable in the way that it was envisaged.
Yeah, that can happen. Deeds of variation to the legal agreement is usually the best route for that, because it's safer and legal for everyone to approach it like that. Things can change over time. We normally start from quite a broad request for that contribution, a spend purpose in the legal agreement. We try and ask for as broad but as fair a purpose as we can, so that if things do change, for example, we now ask for all mainstream funding to be possibly spent on special education needs, if that is required over the lifetime of that funding. And often many education facilities don't just educate mainstream kids, they will educate special education kids as well. So yes, having that flexibility in a legal agreement is really key, but you can repurpose by mutual agreement, as you've suggested, via a deed of variation is the best route, I'd say.
My final question, please, is, just asking in terms of the number of Section 106s where you actually do have to return and have returned money. I'm getting the feeling that the number's quite low. As a percentage, just roughly, do we know the ballpark?
I don't know whether to be proud of this or not, because clearly if we ask for money, we should be spending that money, and therefore the figure is vanishingly low for education. I can't think of any funding that we have returned in the 5 years I've been in this job for education. Slightly different on the highway side. I'm not as close to the highway side of things. They instruct legal themselves, they respond to planning applications themselves, they're delivering themselves. My team support them in that role. But there does seem to be a slightly higher incidence, and it's possibly because of the nature of that type of infrastructure. It's a bit more flexible to other changes going on. Essex County Council as the Highways Authority, but there are other people at play in that area of infrastructure. So perhaps that's a factor in returning of things.
But if I could just also say that in the 2.5 years I've been in the role, it's been very, very small amounts. I don't know the percentage exactly, but it's very small.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gerard.
I think my questions have been answered actually, because it was just tying back to education and then how you do the planning, given that for a new development, typically there seems to be like 10-year hold on the provision of a school. So I think my question has been answered. Thank you.
Councillor Fulcher.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned, and if I reiterate also what my colleagues, and thanking you for your presentations, thank you. In terms of specialist facilities such as schools, they seem to me they would benefit possibly 2 counties. Our 106 monies ever asked from a neighbouring county for a nearby facility?
There can be cooperation with neighbouring authorities. Probably a good example of that is the Harlow-Gilston project, where we're working with colleagues at Hertfordshire, or education colleagues are. There is no Section 106 money coming into the education service in Essex, and Hertfordshire will take that Section 106, and the infrastructure will be delivered on their side of the border, but will benefit communities on both sides. So there is engagement and collaboration between education authorities and infrastructure providers.
Well, thank you very much. We don't appear to have anyone else who wishes to speak. I'd like to thank all members here for their highly intelligent and articulate questions, which have been put to both Lee and Alethea, but can I particularly express my thanks, I'm sure not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of everyone here, for both attending this evening and for the very thorough way in which you have dealt with a whole range of questions, all of which have been fired to you at you with no forewarning whatsoever. So thank you all very much indeed. That, I believe, concludes this item, other than to say, members, can I ask you, do you agree to note this presentation this evening?
Agreed.
I thank you for that. Alethea and Scott, you are free to depart. We have one other. Very happy New Year to you. Thank you. We move then to item 6 on the agenda, which is the Scrutiny Work Programme. The report begins on page 53 of the agenda. I would like to remind members that items for inclusion in this plan should be submitted via the online form, after which they will be duly considered. I will therefore move the recommendation contained in the report. Do I have a second?
Happy to second and reserve my right to speak.
I'm then happy to put the matter out to debate, and can I just remind members that each of you have 3 minutes to speak. Councillor Slade.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, could I ask you to raise with Mr Houghton, the Director of Environment, regarding the Woodland Management Plan? The summary additional information states final plan for committee to review and recommend to Clean and Green Committee following the working group meeting that is not the actual reason why I requested that the Woodland Management Plan was added to the Scrutiny Performance and Standards Committee. And looking back at the agendas going back to the 26th of February 25, that was when I first requested the Woodland Management Plan to be included, and that was to review the failings of the plan currently and the stop order that was in place. And just to also to bring to the attention of this committee, yes, a woodland management working group had been created and it has met, and on that, one part of the agenda for that meeting was regarding a new woodland management plan, which I seek clarification from the Forestry Commission regarding if that would be possible. And the question I asked would the Forestry Commission entertain a new woodland management plan submission prior to the completion of the 2018 Woodland Management Plan, to which the Forestry Commission replied, the management plan does run for 10 years, so will run to 2028. We would accept our application for another plan when there is 1 year left of the plan. So in 2027 is when the Forestry Commission will look to accept application for another plan. So the current woodland management plan we have is valid. We can't look at a new plan until 27, and the reasons given in that additional information are not the reasons as to why I requested that this item was put onto the this agenda. Thank you.
I don't know, Mr. Campbell, are you able to assist Councillor Slade?
I think, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Slade, I think we probably just need to review why this was put onto in the first place, and then we can clarify with you, Chair, and your agreement what is meant to be coming to that committee, because I know there is due to be a woodland management working group getting together soon, and it's also whether that probably coincides with this report coming to here, because that may need to meet before that report is produced and before it comes to here. So probably take this offline, just check what it is for, and then we can come back and just clarify with yourself, Chair, as well.
I'm very happy to support that course. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? We can now proceed to the vote on the recommendations on page 55 of the agenda. All those for? Well, can I thank everyone this evening for your good nature, and as I already indicated, the very comprehensive and intelligent manner in which a very detailed set of questions were presented. I think it's a great compliment to all members here as to their knowledge of Section 106 agreements and their inquiring minds, and hopefully we will all leave this meeting a good deal more up to date with what Section 106 agreements are all about. There doesn't appear to be any other urgent items of business this evening, so it is therefore with pleasure I announce this meeting this evening is now closed. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you.